delve into something you probably haven't seen before on complex roots, sometimes known as imaginary numbers. Okay? What this allows you to do is work with square roots of negative numbers. Okay? It's actually kind of weird, but it's actually really simple at the same time, because all the rules of square roots that you just did on your assessment today and the other day, you have to be able to do today too. So you take the square roots of the number parts just like you did before, okay? But what you're doing now is taking the square root of the negative part. So the square root of a -1 is equal to I. Okay, so that's rule number 1. So that's our first big thing. The square root of a -1 is equal to I. So if you ever seen some of those dorky math shirts, it's actually on our math Twitter thing that says the square root of a -1 heart math. That's I. I don't know if you've ever seen that or not, but it's a dorky math thing where they use the square root of a -1 to say I. Okay? So square root of a -1 is equal to I. If we took this equation and squared both sides, square I, so I times I gives you I squared, square a square root just gives you what's underneath, so -1. So this is our other important fact, that I to the second power is equal to a -1. So we will not leave any answers with an I to a power. So there'll be no powers on our I's, because we can simplify that, okay? We can leave an I in our answer, but we cannot leave an I squared or I to the third or anything like that in our answer, okay? So, technically speaking, on my first, let me point this out. This is the biggest, hugest mistake people make on these, is you have to take the square root of the -1 before you do an operation. Now, I don't have one of those yet. When I get to it, I'll say it again, because that's the biggest thing that people do wrong, and I don't give you any credit for it, like 0 partial credit for that kind of question, because that has to be step 1, okay? Okay, now technically speaking, the square root of a -49, what we would do is break this to the square root of 49 times -1. Now we're not going to do that from here on out, but I'm going to show you that that's what we're doing. So we're taking a number and we're breaking it into the positive number times the -1 to make it negative. Then the square root of 49 is 7. And the square root of -1, that's our new rule, is I. So my answer is 7I. Now, we're not going to show that every time. We're just going to take the square root of the negative and make it I. So we don't have to rewrite every question as a positive number times a -1. We don't need to do that. Okay, we're smarter than that. We don't have to show that. So we're just going to take the square root of the negative part and make it I. But technically, this is what you're doing. Okay, 24 is not a perfect square, but we know we would break that to 4 times 6. So I have my square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 6 I don't know. And then the square root of the negative part is I. So 2I square root 6. The negative square root of 25 over 81. These have perfect squares. 5 over 9. The square root of the negative part, I. Or you could write that as 5I over 9. Either way, that's the same thing. The square root of 3 does not have a square or breakdown, so it stays there, but the square root of the negative part is I. That's what I mean by it's a simple thing to do. You're not doing anything new with your numbers than you did before. 5 times the square root of -300. I'm going to take 300 and break it to 100 times 3. So I have my square root of 100 is 10. Times my 5 is 50. My square root of 3 left. And the square root of the negative is I. 72 breaks to 36 times 2. So I have my square root of 36 is 6 times my 6 on the outside makes 36, in fact negative 36. Square root of 2 I don't know. The square root of the negative is I. Okay, some questions so far. It's a weird concept, but not too difficult. Okay? This next question is the type of question I was talking about up here where I said you must take the square root before you do the operation, the square root of the negative part. So in one like this, do not multiply and get positive 21. Okay? That's what you cannot do. You have to take the negative root out before you can multiply. That's not the same as with regular multiplication. Okay? So I'm going to take the I out first. So I'm going to have I square root 7. The square root of the negative is I square root 3. Now I'm going to multiply. I's multiply, add, subtract, divide, just like variables do. So when I take I times I get I to the second power. Square root 21. Back from the beginning. That's our second rule. I squared equals a negative 1. So we're not going to leave anything with a power on an I. So I squared can be replaced with a negative 1. So negative 1 square root 21, or just negative square root 21. So I squared with anything just makes it the opposite sign. So this right now is an I squared square root 21. It's just going to make it a negative square root 21. If it had said, I'll just do the next question because that's what it's going to say. Okay, so I take my square root of my negative. So I have I, leave the 6 there. The square root of the negative is I, leave the 12 there. Now multiply and get negative I squared square root, what is that, 72? 72. Is not a perfect square, but we'll break to 36 times 2. I just did that on the question above. So I'm going to have negative 6 I squared square root 2. So I've got my square root of 36 is 6. I've got my negative I, and negative I squared's out there already. It doesn't matter if you write it negative I squared 6. This just looks nicer. It's like how we typically write a variable with a coefficient. Okay, now I squared is negative 1. And I typically don't write this step, but I'm going to show it to you. So this is like negative 6 times negative 1 square root 2, which is just positive 6 square root 2. So when I do this in the future here on down, if I have a question with an I squared, and it's positive, like this one, I'm just going to make it negative. And if I have a negative I squared, it's just going to become positive, because I squared is negative 1. So all it's going to do is change the sign. So you don't have to write that all this time now. Okay? Okay, these next questions have perfect squares, so let's go ahead and take them. So I'm going to have negative. Square root of 5 is 25. Square root of the negative is I. Negative. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of the negative is I. And then when I multiply these together, I get positive 15 I squared. But I squared is negative 1, so this is actually negative 15. Here in this next one I have, this one is simple as it can go. I square root 3 times I square root 12, take the square root of that negative, multiply it together, and I get I squared square root 36 the square root of 36 is 6. I squared was already there. I squared is just negative 1, so negative 6. Okay, some questions. Okay, when you add and subtract, as I said previously, you treat it just like it's another variable, just like it's an x. So when I add these two expressions together, 5 and negative 7 is negative 2, and 6i plus 2i is 8i. Typically, when you write an expression with an imaginary or complex number in it, the I part comes second, but I really don't care. I would not mark it wrong. But typically, expressions are left in a plus bi form, which means the real part and then the imaginary part. But I really don't care. Okay, just so you know that's how it's typically written. Same kind of question on the next one, except that you have a subtraction, which means that these signs are going to change. So I have positive 8 and minus 1 is 7, and then negative 7i and positive 5i is negative 2i. Typically, when I type this, it types in italics, and for whatever reason, it wouldn't type that one in italic, but that's how you know the difference, that you're working with an imaginary number and not just a variable. It's usually italicized. We multiply i's just like we're multiplying x's. So 7i times 6i, 42i squared, which is negative 42. Three times 10i, 30i. Negative 4i squared means negative 4i times negative 4i, which is positive 16i squared, which is negative 16. Hopefully, when you look at this next question, you're seeing FOIL, binomial times a binomial. So first times first is 12. Outer times outer minus 15i. Inner times inner, positive 4i. Last times last, negative 5i squared. Or minus 5i squared, either way. Minus 5i squared is actually just plus 5. So 12 and 5 is 17. And negative 15 and positive 4 minus 11i. So the two key things is that your I squared is negative 1, and the square root of a negative 1 is I. Those are the two rules. Okay, and we finish up with two division questions.